going to transition over into our next session here. And Matt, thanks for asking the question earlier. I love the participation there. And Sunil, it's great to see you. And we're going to do a little bit of sharing the moderator duties here as well. And I'll kick it off, and then Matt, I'll have you kind of take over a little bit. But why don't we start with some brief introductions? Sunil, if you can introduce yourself, and then Matt.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Drew. I'm glad to be here together with you, Matt. So my name is Sunil Karkera, and I'm talking to you from Santa Clara in California. My main job, what I do for a living, is I'm the global managing director for probably I consider one of the best strategic design teams in the world, Design It. We are a 30-year-old design team that has been practicing strategic design for eons, while inventing some of the design principles that are used today. In my previous life, I've built design and engineering teams at scale. I've also written a lot of machine level code for operating systems. Mm-hmm. I studied engineering, and also did go to University of Zurich to learn typography, especially. So that's typography is my first love, actually, right now.
That's great. And as a former Santa Clara University graduate, way to go, Santa Clara. Say hello to Santa Clara for me. Matt, you are a colleague as well as a friend, so I know what you do, but tell everybody out there what you're doing over there at Columbia.
Yeah, so just pleasure to be here, Sunil. Look forward to the discussion. Always good to see you, Drew, and the whole Techonomy and CDX team. So thank you for that. As I mentioned earlier in my audio question, I direct the Center on Global Brand Leadership at Columbia Business School, basically creating, gathering, and sharing knowledge on what it takes to build a strong brand. And so we support teaching and events as well as research on that. And we view brand as essentially anything that affects the relationship between an organization or a person, place, or thing and its stakeholders. So, marketing and communications are key elements of that, but we're as fascinated by innovation, technology, data, supply chain, and operations, where those have strong impacts on how those relationships are built and maintained.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. It's really great to have you here and sort of co-moderate you with, as always, and look forward to attending your Bright conference. Just a plug for you. Matt has a great conference called Bright, which will spread the word around. Sunil, I always like to start at big picture, and I know when we were talking on the prep call, this is about data and data building great brands and helping building great brands, but it's not going to be sort of a big data conversation. Data is impacting design, strategy, the whole 9 yards there. So I'd just like to get your sort of strategic, philosophy around data. I know you talk about being sort of, data informed and versus data driven, and how data really is informing the broader sort of strategic exercise of marketing, customer experience, and even strategy. But give us your philosophy there.
Sure, Drew. And we have a reputed academic and company here with Matt, so I'll go a little bit academic in my answer too. So when I look at data, I think data is, what is data? Data is an individual unit that I consider is a raw material, not necessarily carrying any specific meaning. Information is a group of data that collectively carry a logical meaning. So I see it that way. And data doesn't depend on information, right? Information depends on data. So data becomes very essential. I consider the fifth element after earth, water, wind, and fire. Very, very critical, essential, right? So there are what I consider 3 states of data, and I think if we categorize both structured and unstructured data in 3 basic ways of looking at states of data. One is data at rest, which is like rows in a table, like a database, right? It's files in a file system. It's sometimes pre-computed analytics. There's also data in motion. Data in motion is email, Slack, IoT sensor data, things moving, things that are creating value. And then data in use. Best example I would say is actually working memory of a CPU. Is data in use, or your security credential, username and password is data in use. Personalization data that you use for user journeys, customer personalization, that's data in use. So looking at that in 3 states, right? Data can change states very quickly and frequently, or it can remain in a single state forever throughout its life cycle. the value of data though changes based on several things. If you value data, it's based on like how fast it changes data to what's its recency, what's its relevancy, and the value of data impacts the brands and customers' experience substantially. It's not just the data; it's the value of data that impacts. So it's always not about the data; it's enriching the value. So at DesignIt, what we do is we focus on three key pillars as from a create, launch, and engage. And from a strategic perspective, we help organizations create meaningful products, services, brands, right? For that, as designers, this may come sometimes as, oh, what do you deal with data as designers? We consider data as a strategic pillar of design. It's strategic data design is design, because if design has the design of how things look and the design of how things work, for both of them you need data, right? Data design should have a front row seat in the create process, the creation of ideas, the creation of products. Products should be designed with the state of data in mind. So designers should know about the data in rest, motion, and use when interacting with the products. So through design, we can, I think, also bake in privacy and ethics and all those things right at the inception. So that's my overall picture of data.
That's great. And Matt, before we sort of transition to you as leading the conversation, I just want to get your top line thoughts as well. You work with a lot of brands, you've interviewed a lot of brands at your conferences. What's your sort of top line philosophy in terms of data and where it rests within the organization in informing the broader marketing discipline, customer experience, et cetera?
Yeah, Sunil, right on point, I think, with how you break down what we mean by data. So really important there that it is in constant flow. Some of it may be relatively steady state, but that a lot of it is moving all the time. So one of the key things with all of this is how are you regulating that? And how are you managing it? And how are you understanding when you may have sort of corruption, for lack of a better word, entering into the data so that it is not actually giving you insights on what's happening. And it's giving you something that's a little false, and then you're making decisions based on that. So I think, like, following on to Sunil's point, it's one of the key things is how are you constantly monitoring that data? And of course, the key question, which is very much the academic thing, is what questions are you asking the data to answer? And how are you asking the right questions of the data to think about how you can design things for good outcomes, right? The data itself is kind of, irrelevant. It isn't interested in giving you insights per se. It's asking the right questions of it. And that's where you see, some great examples are poor. I mean, we all have experiences where it feels to me like there has to be data in there that would allow that company to do this better. I mean, I give the simple example of using FaceTime, right? If my wife has last called her, mom or dad, and then my kids are trying to FaceTime their grandparents on the tablet, the first thing that pops up might be the mom or dad, but it's a phone call, not a FaceTime. So you have to go through 3 clicks just to reconnect the tablet to the FaceTiming the grandparent instead of immediately recognizing, oh, this tablet's on a Wi-Fi system instead of on 4G, and I don't want the phone number. I just want to use the FaceTime Wi-Fi system. And Apple's an icon of good design, of looking at data, and yet there's still little things in which the right questions or the right thoughts of how we can use that data are not happening.
No, that's great. No, that's a great setup, and I'll let you go from here. I will be here, but I'll go off video and audio because I want people to focus on you two and not me. So take it away, Matt.
Excellent. Thanks, Drew. And of course, as Drew mentioned, if you do have questions, by all means, pop them into the chat. I'll be paying attention to that and try to bring things into the conversation. So let's dive a little. You gave this sort of flow of data. Let's talk a little bit about also types of data, Sunil, because it's like animals do this. Well, there's a whole classification of animals, and they are all slightly different and have different areas and different attitudes and different expectations and different behaviors, right? So I think it would be great for you to dial into the various types of data. How do you think about categorizing it, integrating it effectively as an organization to then create the insights out of it?
Sure. I'll focus on the types of data specifically, Matt, around getting insights, the data that drives insights. So I believe, and I see this, there are three categories, I would say. One is the decision-making data. So decision-making data comes from pre-computed facts, transactions, and data that's coming from different devices, or your point of sale, or your order data, or something like that, or your any engagement data, analytics, analytical systems like Google Analytics, for example. So all these are pre-computed most of the time, with which you see trends to make what-if analysis, right? This is made out of facts. The trends it shows are as true as the data itself. So if your statistics is right. So this is the regular decision-making data that we use. The second one, which is important, and it's basically dependent on the third type of data. The second one is actually predictive data. The predictive data, and there's a misconception with the predictive, it's probabilistic data. It's a series of probabilities. It's not deterministic data. The decision-making data from the first one, from facts, is basically deterministic data. The second, predictive data, is probabilistic. It's a series of probabilistic. This must be about this much, and this may go there, this may head there, right? It has a vector. It has a magnitude and a vector, and it has a series of probabilities. So it's plotted on a gradient. And this is where all the innovation is actually happening, how to predict better, how to get the probabilities right. And all the cool things that are happening is in that area. But to get there, you need another set of data, which is descriptive data. Descriptive data is data about data. It describes the data. And I believe to get to the prediction level, and if you want to apply cognitive intelligence, especially machine intelligence, you need the data about data. And for getting to the predictive intelligence, to get your probabilities right? So, but that requires an assertive, a designed method to create that data, the descriptive data, while you're processing transactions, or while you're engaging with users, or all your methods. You have to actually, from an engineer mind, also write code to generate that metadata, design for that metadata, and how you collect it. And the fun part is, there is a whole industry about metadata that a lot of my customers are not aware of. For example, businesses are not aware. There's dedicated products, open source as well as commercial, for metadata ingestion, metadata ETL, storage of metadata, classification and segmentation of metadata, and management of metadata. So one pro tip I would give to listeners would be, if you're acquiring third-party data, and if you want to get your money's worth, do ask for the metadata too, not just the data.
Yeah, it's the tying together, right? You need the descriptive information to take the various disparate pieces of data you get and unify them in some way. I even think about, right, and I'm so into the probabilistic thing, right? We tend to, especially in our society now, hyperbole ones or zeros, instead of the reality is it's lots of ones and zeros moving all the time, and there's a wave in the midst of that. Right. I think of, like, if you had traffic in New York City on a Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. is going to be busy. Yeah. Except if that happens to be December 25th, the Monday falls on December 25th, and you predict it's going to be super busy, you're going to be way off, right? Because there's added elements to every one of the probabilities, has other pieces of context and information to get truly accurate elements of it. So I love that. Maybe talk a little bit also about literally types of data, from ones and zeros to visual information, textual information. How are you guys beginning to look at, how do you subset those? How do you begin to try to integrate things that are happening from the various different sources of data that are available in the world right now?
Sure. I'll give a little bit long form answer about this, if you don't mind, Matt. So in terms of yes. So data is like, there's various forms of data, and data has different characteristics, as we know, right? So to harness data better, you get data we are in a pandemic world, and we have seen that products and industries are not alone. It's part of an ecosystem. So data is now not yours alone. It's an ecosystem level data, where brands actually work with the ecosystem. If you create a product, you need a last mile delivery. You need to integrate with last mile. So that's why most data that we use in our businesses or in our organizations are temporal and sparse. It's based on a time series. It's very small. It's temporal and sparse. They have different characteristics of handling it, right? IoT data, for example, is temporal and sparse. It's a sensor saying my temperature is this. It may be the IoT sensor in the milk, section of a supermarket in the retail store. Its data is temporal and sparse, right? A counter or journey data for customers, temporal and sparse. They require time series. We put them generally in the wrong databases most of the time, in a regular, relational database rather than a time series database. We don't use them well. This is one of my pet peeves actually about these kind of data, right? And then there is this, which I think you kind of were alluding to, which is when you said the binary zeros and ones, documents, images, that's data too. That's actually substantially important data from which you can actually derive location and context most of the time, right? And you can also get intent from documents, right? They are a source of knowledge, and we don't treat them right. We just put them in a file system rather than actually putting them, deriving metadata, deriving intent, cataloging it properly, faceting them and segmenting and classifying documents, and making them searchable better. We should actually treat them no differently than we give first-class elevated role for our tables and rows in the database. So documents, images, document form content are very important. An organization that gets documents right will have a lot of its information retention and knowledge retention for its employees. And right then, some data is not that important. There is this. Organizations also need to know what data actually causes harm using latent data. And I call it there's all types of data, including documents as well as rows in a table, become latent, and organizations start still using it. So a data strategy to throw it away or archive it is very important, right? That's also a latent data is a type of data. You have to classify data at a certain milestone as latent and not to use. We already touched with metadata. Consent data, the consent of usage of data. When can you use it? Do you have permission of using it? What kind of permission is also data. It's strategic data. It drives your privacy and ethics of your user contact. Treat it as first level data, not as third level data. It's not an accessory to data. It's actually data. It's important, elevate it. And lastly, I would say for brands to get to a point where you look at data holistically, you want to not perform, or rather to get insights from your data. You want to look at them not in a analytics from a transactional system. You want to analyze it in an analytics system. This is where analytics data is different from your transactional data, and it's often mischaracterized and miscomputed in transactional system. So analytics systems can have duplication. It is all right to have duplicated data. Duplicated data in analytics system is actually good. You are enriching data in a non-destructive way to gain insights. That's also data, the pre-computed. It's a very valuable data.
That's great. I know we only had a couple of minutes left. Drew's let me know we need to, we're going to have to wrap up soon. So give me an example, right? Talk about client experience you've had, challenge going on. Where did you get the data in? What kind of execution did you try to do? And then how did you readjust or try to understand how it worked?
Sure. Yeah, this is my favorite question, actually, I think, which is using data. There are two methods of engagement of data during customer experience, I think. One is to apply data to enhance the customer experience and engagement. Another one is actually to understand the customer experience. This is post-engagement. There are two types, application and understanding, right? So right at the strategic design phase, we kind of do a data strategy of designing the product for applying data and understanding the data, we had a very interesting customer, which is all of us know Sephora. My team in Madrid created the zebra stripes of Sephora and all the things you see in the Sephora store, like parapharmacy and stored in a store and all the interactions. But the Madrid store, it's a flagship store, had very low footfall after a lot of spending, right? It's designed beautifully and all those things. It's in the basement of a really beautiful place. It's a flagship store of Sephora. And we looked at data, we designed around data. What we saw is that staircases and elevators are not used too much for coming to the basement, and moms come with their kids to the mall. So we designed a bunch of slides for the kids to slide down to the Sephora store, right? And this was data informed. So the kids are now telling moms that I do want to go to the Sephora store to slide through. It's a data informed thing. That's really interesting for us, and we learned a lot to use data wisely in that way. The places where it didn't work, for example, was I'll not name this if you don't mind. It's a journalistic venture that we had in Europe where we wanted to use data for eliminating misinformation during COVID. Okay, and how we designed the systems where it introduced a lot of its own biases that we were unaware of, and it started trending in the wrong way. It actually started increasing misinformation rather than reducing misinformation. Yeah.
Right. The data under the analytics understanding is not necessarily as precise as human understanding of things, doesn't have the emotion and additional context at times to do some of the things we wanted to do. Well, Sunil, this was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Drew has jumped back on.
And I do have a quick follow-up there quickly, Sunil, just in terms of looking at, we know about sort of first-party data and the data that sits in spreadsheets, and maybe we have Salesforce or HubSpot and those traditional types of things. For these things that are more in motion or content sort of oriented data, how are you capturing that? Is it off-the-shelf software programs? Is it when you're working with clients, or do they have internal teams that do that? Do you have any sort of recommendations in terms of best practices for the tools or software programs or whatever it is to capture this data that we might not have thought as sort of that traditional data in the past?
I would say open source is so benevolent. There are really good ingestion systems for capturing data. There are commercial products as well, but I would rather right now talk about open source products in terms of data ingestion. One of my favorite open source product, I would say, is Apache Kafka for capturing data for ingestion, especially high-speed data that you want to then facet into topic streams, right? That's one of the best projects, I think, to even study how data is ingested, even from a not a user perspective, but just to go and look at how they're designing itself is so informative for me. And that's one of the top things I would use. Some of the cloud providers like AWS actually base their core systems on Kafka, Kinesis, for example.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, look, this has been great, Sunil. I can't wait to have a follow-on conversation, as it relates to even product design and more data informing design. We don't talk about it a lot, and I definitely look forward to having a follow-on conversation. Matt, thanks as always for jumping in as moderator. Sunil, it's great to have you here as well, and we look forward to continuing the partnership, and we always appreciate Wipro support and Design It as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Great.
Drew.
Thank you.